Hi, Witness here. I wanted to take a look over the Essence League's design and possible takeaways for future leagues. Now, Essence League is not as complex as the Prophecy system. That's because it was released to go with the Atlas. With new areas, bosses, and mechanics to get used to, I think the Essence League design did the job well enough for non-endgame content. A bit before the start of the Essence League, I made a video asking if people wanted to be incentivized into harder content or forced into it. Though most say incentive, many players don't go out of their way to find the incentive. But for the Essence League, it's much easier to see the reason to interact with the league than it is for, say, Prophecy. Getting life, energy shield, resists, and damage crafts on everything is pretty obvious enough, and when the meta is obviously going towards CI, Essence of Woe's prices are triple that of the other essences. There are also a few unexpected new rare items that we can craft now, being able to put plus to elemental socketed gems and spell damage on bows, cast speed on daggers, intelligence and dexterity on belts, crit multiplier on diamond rings, all the minion crafts, and elemental and chaos damage on jewelry. Added to that, there are the weird crafts that come from the corrupted essences, like Essence of Delirium's Decay being put on a weapon, which ended up scaling well with Essence Drain and Vortex. Certainly, the people who took advantage of the Prophecy League were getting more out of it than the people who didn't, but it wasn't as clear to players the incentive of using prophecies as it was to use essences. Even small things like crafting resistance on a leather belt and getting a life roll can be very rewarding at the start of the league. While it is hard for most players to experiment with things like Delirium Decay, these things became more well known through community sharing. But the reason to engage with Essence League is pretty clear enough, so despite it being optional like Prophecy, players were more likely to engage with it if for no other reason than to sell all the essences to other players. One other thing that this showed, and I think GGG has been looking more into this because they succeeded here where they didn't do it in Prophecy, is how it impacts leveling. My feeling is that leagues like Invasion and Beyond didn't annoy players because they were mandatory and unavoidable, but because they were hindering during the leveling process. I remember people not liking Beyond until they realized it was giving more XP and maps during the next league and they started trying to craft it on all their maps. Prophecy didn't impact leveling because silver coins were seen as something to save, but the Essence League actually helped people leveling because they knew the better drops occur later, and so the early essences helped leveling at the beginning of the league. For example, when I started leveling my explosive arrow character at the very beginning of the league, I crafted several elemental bows until I could switch to explosive arrow and use quill rain. And after that I was able to cap out resistances and get a lot of life on most of my gear while leveling up. And this continued as I leveled my character to 90 by buying a white 5-link chest and using the Essence of Greed on it. It's something people liked about Kadiro that he helped out during the leveling as well, even though it made people go through tedious horrendous mob fights. So I think whether GGG makes a league's mechanics avoidable or not, I think the positive impact on leveling can go a long way into keeping people around until they reach map, which the game has the most retention of players. The league that comes out with Act 5 might not need to have something for leveling, because the leveling areas will likely change in terms of areas and layouts, and the league will likely be something more endgame related. However, the impact of essences on leveling stops for players after getting enough leveling gear, meaning if you level other characters, you're likely to ignore essences while leveling up again. The re-leveling process is different as the league progresses, and it's difficult for an optional league's mechanics to be relevant to that process. Now, this may not be something necessarily for a league to fix. Whatever the fastest way of leveling will be what most people gravitate to when re-rolling new characters, and we'll end up doing it regardless of whatever the league's mechanics are. In order for these mechanics to be tempting in this situation, they will have to provide enough experience for players to not rush to the normal leveling zones. That or provide an alternative method of leveling as opposed to our current process. And if the mechanic is always there, like invaders, players will opt out to running away from these encounters or resetting the zone. As it stands, after a while, there is no reason while leveling for a player to open up most of the early zone's essences other than remnants of corruption. Speaking of which, essences of corruption start appearing at the end of normal. However, as you progress through the game, more essences become available, and this has the effect of making the essence of corruptions not as available later on because it dilutes the pool. This effect is also compounded by the fact that generally when you're doing maps, you'll have less of them occurring, but you're also starting to use them because that's where the higher end essences occur. I found through leveling several characters that leveling in Cruel is where I found most of them, and I start losing them while I'm mapping. People have said they would like to have used Val Orbs instead, but I think that just overloads Val Orbs. You could just buy them, and they are relatively cheap, but I wanted more reasons to use them. I wish they were more easily attained so that I'm more inclined to use them outside of Screaming Woes and the 4 corruptible essences. If the fear is that they would make good corruptions too common, then that could be balanced out by reducing the rate of good corruptions, rather than reducing the rate the essences of corruptions occur. I want more scary encounters with possibilities of good rewards. I only once had to run away from a corruption in a T14 scary map with a tri-essence mob. This can be done by increasing the rate of them or having a chance of remnant of corruption of dropping from any essence encounter, which would make people more likely to open them up even at low levels if this was possible. Overall, I think as a league to race with an expansion with mapping, it does help a lot cover the areas that the expansion didn't touch. This would have to be more content if it was a league on its own. However, the leagues released on their own should likely follow the idea of making leveling more enjoyable, having clear incentives to interact, and hidden things for people to discover. From a basic point of view, the Essence League has done this pretty well. I'm not saying it's the best league or my favorite league. It's kinda hard to compare it to a fuller fleshed out league and separating the stuff that occurred from the Atlas in terms of my own enjoyment. But there's a lot to take from the concepts of this league that I would hope to see in future implementations.